I teach in both the full psychoanalytic training program at my institute, but we also have a 2-year psychoanalytic psychotherapy program, which I also teach in. Um, 2 years in a row now, we have a faculty meeting of our psychoanalytic psychotherapy training program. And both last year and this year, the question comes up concerning the practice of having candidates or trainees take process notes on their work with their patients. The rationale for note-taking, at least for educational purposes in the Institute, the regulatory colleges also require some note-taking regarding each session. But in training institutes, we encourage trainees to take close process notes in order to be able to present their work in a fairly detailed fashion. He said, she said, dreams, so that they can present these in continuous case seminars so that fellow candidates and faculty can hear what's going on in the sessions, how the process is unfolding, what the patient is saying, how the trainee analyst or therapist is intervening. Okay, that's the purpose. But many of us realize that in encouraging such note-taking, we're encouraging the development of a bad habit. When the therapist is taking notes, he or she is not entirely with the patient. Most of us can walk and chew gum at the same time, but in therapy, listening and taking notes are two different things. We don't need to go to the Zen tradition, Zen in the art of archery, where it's pointed out that the shooting of the arrow is quite a different thing from watching yourself shoot the arrow. To the extent that you're watching yourself shoot the arrow, you don't hit a bullseye. You may miss the target altogether. Self-consciousness gets in the way. Note-taking gets in the way of proper analytic listening. Wilfred Bion said that the therapist should approach the session without memory or desire. Now, he never meant this to be taken literally. It would be disastrous for the patient if the analyst had no memory of him or her. And of course, what would be the point if the analyst came with no desire to help, no desire to further the analytic process? Of course, we come with memory and we come with desire. But Bion had a point. He meant his point was pretty much the same as Freud's point, that the analyst should, in the session, have what he called evenly suspended attention. The patient should freely associate. The analyst should have freely hovering attention. The analyst shouldn't be terribly focused. He should be open to the forest, not to the trees. If he's at all Kleinian, he should be listening to the patient, but also listening to himself, listening to the fantasies that come up in his mind in reaction or relation to what the patient is saying. He should be paying attention to the feelings and emotions that are stirring in him in relation to the patient. and he should be listening to what the patient is saying, and he should be moving back and forth in this freely hovering kind of way. Note-taking really interferes with this. In my institute, most people seem to assume that candidates should be taking close notes. I think our rule is that one of the 4 sessions, there should be detailed process notes. Maybe for the other 3 sessions each week, this is not necessary. This way, at least the candidate will have 1 session per week to share with fellow candidates and faculty to show how he's working. Okay, that's a concession. My point is that note-taking can be a real problem. It certainly was for me. As a candidate, I was pressed to make detailed process notes. I dutifully did so, and in the process developed an addiction. I became addicted to taking notes. And after a few years after graduation, I began to realize that my note-taking was a defense against the patient, a defense against being with the patient, a defense against the aspect of spontaneous play with the patient. I began to realize that I was not relating directly to the patient. The patient was making it to my clipboard and then only then to me. So the clipboard was like a wall or like a shield that I put up between me and the patient. I was not open to encounter with the patient. I made the patient reach me through the screen of the notes and the clipboard. I began to struggle against this. I forced myself to put the clipboard down. Eventually, I succeeded. Occasionally, I would pick it up. When the patient would bring a dream, I would sometimes justify picking up the clipboard. Dreams are so important. Freud said there's the royal road to the unconscious, so I would pick up the clipboard, note down the dream, note down the patient's associations to the dream. Gradually, I weaned myself even of that. I never pick up the clipboard. I tried to arrive in the session in an open, receptive, listening. I try not to intervene too quickly. I want to hear what flows from the patient spontaneously. I don't want to interrupt that. I don't go silent. I'm not one of those analysts of the still face, hiding behind a professional facade. No, I'm available. At least by halfway through the session, I weigh in. Sometimes I'm quite talkative. But at the beginning of sessions, I like to sit back receptively and listen without a clipboard walling the patient off from me. It took me quite a few years to overcome this addiction. I'm quite convinced that training candidates to take detailed notes is training stenographers, not analysts. Okay, so then when I make this argument against note-taking, invariably a trainee or an analyst, a fellow faculty member, will usually sort of smile condescendingly, and I should say also, smugly, but Don, if you don't like note-taking, why don't we just have the trainee audio or video record the session and take that to the supervisor? The very idea of this horrifies me. These colleagues can't understand, apparently, why I would be horrified about that. I say, well, that's not psychoanalysis anymore. You've introduced a third into the private, confidential dialogue. The Oedipal implications of this, it's not just me and my patient privately interacting. There is now this tape recorder or this video cam recording the whole thing. And trainee takes that to the supervisor. What happens to it after the supervisor listens to it? Does it lie around in his office? Who else gets to access this audio record or this video tape? And the patient is sitting there not knowing who the hell is going to be listening or viewing the session. Patients are bringing their soul to a relationship with someone who at the beginning they don't know at all, a total stranger, who could be a psychopath, who could be crazy, who could be incompetent, who could be unethical. Many therapists are incompetent, poorly trained. Many are unethical. The founder of the Toronto Psychoanalytic Society was a psychopath. Patients need to test their analyst for a long time to find out if he's trustworthy, to find out if he has a conscience, to find out if he's honest. But now we're introducing an audio recorder or a video recorder into the privacy of this soul communication. You see, I believe that the psychoanalytic consulting room is a sacred space protected by confidentiality. But at this point, the smug colleague says, but Dawn, there's already a third introduced in the process because the trainee knows that the therapist or the analyst is going to be talking about this work, this process with a supervisor. So the supervisor is already kind of hovering there in the room. Patient knows that his strict confidentiality is being violated because the trainee is talking to a supervisor. Well, we tell patients the advantage of this. Patient's getting two heads for the price of one. His therapist might be a raw beginner, but he should be a bit reassured that this raw beginner's work is being looked over by a senior, very experienced person. And that supervisor will be giving the benefit of his or her wisdom to the trainee, whose work will hopefully benefit from this, and this is good for the patient. Okay, yeah, that's true. But to go from the awareness that what you're saying to your therapist is going to be discussed with a senior therapist, that's bad enough. I mean, I don't see how we can avoid that. That's necessary. It's already an intrusion of a third. It's already a violation of confidentiality, and that's bad enough. But it seems to be unavoidable. Trainees need supervision. Okay. But to go from that to make matters 100 times worse, to tape the patient's words to the therapist or videotape the session. I mean, if I can think of a metaphor, it's one thing to kiss and tell. It's another thing to record the whole interaction and put it up on the YouTube for all and sundry to observe. Okay, supervision. Talking to another analyst about the work that the trainee is doing is already in my view, a kind of violation, a necessary one. We have to kiss and tell, but we don't have to audio or video record this highly private and sacred process whereby one person puts his heart and his soul into communication of very private parts of his world and of his self. And he trusts enough to do that to another person, and to have this recorded and put away on a shelf somewhere. I think what horrifies me most is the attitude that some colleagues have towards this process. They take it for granted. They think there's nothing at all wrong with it. I think they arrogantly think of themselves as something like scientists. And the patients, I think, are the insects who are being studied in the laboratory. No, the patients are not insects being studied by scientists in white coats. The patients are human beings. And I think colleagues have lost sight of this. I think particularly the psychologists, and even more so probably the psychiatrists, I guess they're partly trained to think of themselves as scientists. They're not scientists. At best, this is a very soft science, psychotherapy, psychoanalysis. But what a bad attitude. You know, we are the experts, we are trained, we are licensed. These people who come and talk to us are patients. They're people who have problems. They're not entirely mentally well. The therapists, are going to, I guess it's like a zoo, and maybe we're going to record our interaction with the monkeys so that we can show how we interact with the monkeys to other experts who might help us know something about better ways. But we're not dealing with monkeys, we're dealing with human souls. And the human soul is a sacred thing. You don't make audio records or video records. It's bad enough that your therapist is talking about you behind your back to a supervisor. That's unavoidable. But to not see the difference between that and making audio and video recordings, I find the inability to appreciate the difference rather shocking. Where is the empathy and the understanding and the humanity of people who do not see the difference between these things? Okay,